Hi there, I'm Jules, Jules Whale, and I run a life coaching practice in Salisbury. And as part of my desire to actually get out there the benefits of NLP and coaching and all things positive, I've started doing a series of little podcasts. And today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by a friend and colleague of mine who actually has a vested interest as well in coaching, albeit not a coach. And I'd like to say hi to Paul Donkersloot. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Jules. A little bit about me as an introduction. I'm currently the Chief Executive Officer of a multi-academy trust, a group of schools, primary and special schools in West Norfolk, based actually in Kings Lynn, but in the surrounding area. And I came into this, I met Jules on a course we were doing last year, although I think I first met you a couple of years ago, Jules.
You did. And Paul is also a Master NLP practitioner. So he has a good understanding of all things NLP. What I wanted to really talk around today, Paul, and it'd be really useful for me and for the listener to actually explore what actually happens during a transformation breakthrough day. Now, to give a bit of a background to this, as master practitioners, we need to experience any intervention that we're actually going to be applying in our onward coaching, or in life in general. So that's a standard part of it. And I think from my experience of having it, it brought out a whole lot of stuff that I hadn't expected it to. And the benefits were actually vast. And I know when I spoke with you, Paul, and I actually did your timeline therapy and your sort of interventions throughout that day, transformation day, that you found benefits as well. And I think it'd be really useful if you would just talk a little bit around the context of this, the benefits that you found, the process. Yeah, if you'd be kind enough to do that.
Happy to do that. If I start at the end, it might be quite useful. I remember driving home. I had quite a distance to go from where we'd done the breakthrough day in the East Midlands, right over to the North Norfolk coast. And I remember feeling as tired and as drained as I've probably ever felt. And the journey seemed to take forever. And so much was going on in my mind. But it was although I was tired and although I was drained, it was, if it's possible to be, it was a very positive feeling. I wanted to sleep, but I had so much going on as well. And I think that was the measure of almost a physical impact on me from that particular day. But if we then go back to the beginning, the reason that it worked so well, I think, is because I went into it completely trusting my partner in the process. That was you, Jules, and somebody that I'd worked with over the previous few days. And we definitely had a connection. So I went into it knowing that we were going to be looking at things, almost taking things out and having a look at things that had happened in my life experiences that I'd never ever really thought about in any depth. I'd stored them away somewhere, I like to think safely, and I was I think I was quite anxious initially about what it was going to feel like. The way I've described the end of the process, it obviously did work, and it's I think it's over just about a year ago when we did it, Jules. And in the meantime, I've reflected on that and put lots of things in perspective and taken other things out and looked at them. The biggest impact has been in my relationship with other people, in work and personally. So But the process, the whole process, I felt very safe. That's the most important thing I would get across. And it's absolutely essential, if you're going to get the best out of it or the most out of it, that you go in feeling prepared to maximize the experience.
I think that really sums it up from how I felt as well. And I'm very, very keen to sort of emphasize that we don't need to know what's gone on in somebody's past. We don't need to do that in any part of this process. However, I think that when we worked together and you actually had your breakthrough day, I think from memory, you actually said that you hadn't intended to open up quite as much. And in fact, you'd had a peep inside some of the things and then popped them away again, and then decided on the day that actually it was going to benefit you to do that and to bring them out. Would you think that's a kind of realistic sort of way that you went into it? Is that
Yes, looking back, as I said a couple of minutes ago, I went in prepared to maximise the experience. I reflected on it afterwards with you at the end of the day and said, and we've reflected on it since, and I think it's fair to say I actually went deeper than I expected to do. But then I don't know I don't know how deep I expected to go in the first place. So it was very much a voyage of discovery.
I think that's a really good way to describe it. And from my sort of part in it as the practitioner, if you will, you definitely had a mindset change of being rather guarded to actually, okay, I'm in it now, and I'm interested to kind of look at what point you turned. What was the catalyst for that? Because there was a distinct change. There was a distinct mood change of, hell, I'm going to do this now, and it was just a joy, wasn't it? It was just a joy.
It was. I have to say, I probably wasn't aware of the mood change as you describe it. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I think the initial reticence was probably, it wasn't that I'd gone in feeling that I didn't want to disclose or share. I think it was more I was feeling my way into the process because I genuinely didn't know how I was going to react. And I suppose if I'm entirely honest about it, I was concerned about what my reaction would be, what the depth of my reaction would be. Thinking about it now, it seems that was an unnecessary fear. I mean, there's no doubt about it that in the process, there were points at which I was very emotional, and that's probably the point where you saw the mood change. Probably, I can't pinpoint it now, but it was probably at the point where I first showed some real emotion, and probably, or almost definitely, the fact that you it didn't impact on you in any way. We just carried on, and I think that took me into that safe place.
Mm. And I think this is the all important part in this, is to really, when we talk around this process, to really explore how deep we do go. And there is a definite switch over at some point of thinking, well, we may or may not say something, to actually we and I don't know whether you felt this, but to feel almost a compulsion to say, well, hell, I do want to look at this. I'm ready to look at this, and I'm ready to explore the things around whatever it is. Would you say that?
Definitely. I can feel myself smiling now because, as I say, it was a positive experience, and yes, I obviously did have a need to share it, but I wouldn't have been there in the first place if I didn't have a need to share those things. But I suppose there was that overwhelming feeling that having gone through the process, the NLP process, from start to that point, which was the finish of the actual training, I'd already been through lots and lots of things. And so it was, as you said, just as you described, let's go for it. Let's continue. Let's see where it takes us. And in a sense, I suppose there's an element of, it sounds like free fall, but it wasn't free fall because I knew there was a safety net. There was a safety net in our relationship, our respect for each other, and the fact that you had been through a similar experience with me. So the fact that we have shared with each other things that, and I can say quite honestly, shared things with you and looked at things I've never ever looked at with anybody else.
Mm. So there's a real benefit, isn't there, in this whole process of building that rapport, of reassurance, of trust, building that framework for the day. And I think that you've really explained well of how you think, well, let's go for it. For somebody who wasn't maybe understanding NLP so much, from a completely other perspective, how do you think that the process benefited you if you hadn't have understood the whole NLP process? So if you came and said, well, yeah, I'm going to have a breakthrough day, what do you think would have been the benefits that you'd have had out of that?
That's a really good question, and I have to say I haven't really considered it without the experiences that we'd been to leading up to that. But I don't think it would have been very much different. Possibly that initial reserve that you talked about is because I'd got an inkling of what we were doing and why we were doing it, how we were going to do it. So I was probably anticipating to a certain extent early on what was going to happen next. I was certainly wondering how I would react to you and how you would react to me. But if I hadn't have known anything that gone in there, I still think I would have I still think I would have presented in a very similar way, and I would have got just as much out of it, possibly even more out of it, without understanding necessarily the detail of the process.
Mm.
Does that?
It really does. That's really useful to sort of consider that. And I think the process. We talk about the process, which kind of makes it sound a little bit jiggery pokery. So if you'd be really kind enough to talk through really the sort of journey that you went through in the process, because the process is sounding a little bit clinical. It's sounding a little bit, we talk about the process, and I was kind of want to keep the jargon out of it and talk about really, the day. So the day started, and what happened to you, Paul?
Let's talk about it as an experience, shall we? Because that's what it is. I think that at the beginning of that, before, and it's just putting a little bit of context into it, before you sat down with me, I sat down with you, I'd actually given you some information, which was a brief biography. And given how old I am, to get a lifetime experience or a flavour of a lifetime experience on half a side of A4 was quite a feat, really, quite a feat. But you had actually submitted that to me, and I'd used your format, and that had helped enormously. So there was I suppose there were bullet points of significant, or what I considered significant points in my life experience. And then that it was logical that we were going to follow that line through. what I didn't expect was how much more information that I hadn't really considered fleshed out those life experiences. And that actually some of the significant points that I put down in my life were retrospectively weren't really that significant. It was some of the things that were behind that. And that's the beauty of the experience, is that in your hands, you were able to listen, decipher, and ask some questions that led me into, well, I suppose, to look behind at what was a much more complex picture.
That really, yeah, that's a really, really good way of describing the experience, isn't it? And I think for me, as a, as the person leading the experience, I could see you getting less guarded, getting much more thoughtful around certain incidents that you had thought were significant before, and then watching you work through the process and helping you through the process of actually unpacking them and deciding they're of no significance, little significance, and then going on a little bit, finding things that you had previously almost dismissed as being fairly insignificant, flagging up in front of you, um, in such a big way that we then unpacked those, didn't we? And I think that was, as you've said, the first time that you'd ever discussed some of these things. And again, as a point of reassurance to somebody listening to this, it's a very, very it's a very, very consensual experience, isn't it? It's a very immersive but consensual experience. And I think that's quite important to actually talk a little bit around that.
Well, that goes back to that initial reticence, and then that relaxing into it, that greater and greater exposure, that greater and greater exploration. And that was all, that was based on trust. That's based on trust and respect, as we talked about earlier, and based on that idea of feeling safe. And there's no doubt I did feel safe, because I wouldn't have talked about half of those things. As I said, things I've never talked about before, unless I intrinsically felt that very, very deeply. One of the things that I just pick up from what you just said, because I'd kind of forgotten about it, but there were a couple of significant things that I hadn't even mentioned and wouldn't have even thought about had you not asked a couple of very simple questions. So one of those questions was, you haven't actually mentioned such and such. And I was thinking, my goodness, I haven't. And so it was, I brought to the little biography those things that I thought were significant, and actually missed some elements that were far more significant. So how deep must they have been buried? And they were brought out and examined. And just again, I know I'm talking about the experience after, but it's the experience after that is just as important, or probably more important, than the experience at the time. And that was that I found myself much more forgiving of myself. So I don't let myself get away with a lot, but I do. I'm less critical of that, or I've got more understanding of that, because of the holistic picture that we're able to expose. But also, I view people close to me, some people who I viewed in one particular way, in a very different way now, much more forgiving view of those people, some of those significant people in my life, and why the experience felt like it did, or why the relationship felt like it did. And I think that's probably one of the really, really powerful things that's come out of it, that I could have ended my life feeling very, very differently about some of the significant people in my life, had I not had that experience and be able to think about it, and maybe be asked to consider something else, or look at something else. Or it was as you said earlier, the things that you unpacked, or that we unpacked together, that helped me understand that. And that, I was talking to somebody actually yesterday who's just completed the first part of the course and has signed up for the second part of the course based on how much, he knows me very well, but based on how positively I've talked about that experience. And again, yesterday was reflecting on just what I've said, that it's made me view some things very, very differently. And that's a big improvement in my life.
And that really does encourage one to think about going into the experience as a way of really exploring your life without any inhibition. And you said about forgiving yourself, even though you are still a taskmaster for yourself. And I think that's one of the most powerful, positive things that will come out of the day with this experience, is of this, that actually it's okay, I'm doing okay. Because a lot of people, I believe, take to the experience with, I'm not okay, I'm not a very nice person, I've done stuff I regret, I've done stuff, I've been unkind to people, or whatever that might be. And we carry around this, sometimes we wear a hair shirt, don't we, however well we sort of disguise it under our business attire or whatever we're wearing. But there's this hair shirt that we walk around, and it reminds us that actually we're not very good people. And I find by going through the day and actually being privileged to seeing you, blossom throughout the day, to actually, I'm a really nice person, and I'm okay, and it's okay. And I think, if nothing else, isn't that just a marvelous experience to have?
It is, and I suppose, and again, talking now and reflecting back, the early reticence that you described was, I think that because we make judgments about ourselves, there were, when you look at the significant events I'd recorded that we were going to talk about, I found it difficult to share those things without making some judgments. And the one thing that I didn't feel I needed to do at any stage in the experience, any stage at all, was explain or justify what I'd done. And probably that's why some of those things I've never taken out and looked at, because at the time of some of those experiences, I was being judged, understandably, and I was making judgments about myself. So to take those things out and look at them, in many cases years after the event, and put some context around it without feeling the need to justify it, I started to understand why life had happened as it had, what was behind that. And I remember right at the end of the process, you actually summing up the experience, or my experience, by describing a particular thought that had come into your head about what summarised me as a person. And that was so astute, because I'd never thought of it before, and it explained so many things, that so many of the things and actions that had happened through my life. Not an excuse for it, just it made sense.
And again, I think, as I've said before in, previous podcasts, and I say it to, people I meet in general, friends, family, clients, colleagues, NLP is completely steeped in, it doesn't matter what's happened, we don't look back. But everything we've spoken about this afternoon is about looking back. And I think it's really important to focus upon the fact it isn't a looking back and what could we have done differently. It's what it happened, whatever's happened. And would you say it's beneficial in changing your relationship to what's happened, because we don't look at what's happened?
Yes, definitely, and just the luxury, the self-indulgent luxury of being able to talk about yourself and consider yourself for a whole day is probably one of the it's one of the most outstanding things I've ever done, because it is, if you like, it is self-indulgent, and you luxuriate in it, but for the right reasons, and that accounted for a lot of those things, and it must have been, and it was a very, very significant day, because very, very rarely does a day go back without some reflection on something that happened or something that I'd learned from that. And it wasn't because anybody had told me, it was just that facilitation took place for me to be able to talk about it in a safe environment, to examine it, to reflect upon it. We should do more of it, shouldn't we? We should have that more time to think about ourselves, probably. It's not selfish, it's actually helping other people.
And I think that really is it, isn't it? The benefit for other people. You touched on, you see other people in your life differently now. I know that, in your career, you've got, sort of big chunky career now. And, I think it's fair to say that you've considered changes that are possible even today, based on what you actually unpacked when we spoke on your day, during your day.
Without doubt. Even as we sit here now, I'm looking at other possibilities, other things that I would like to do, that I aspire to do, but most importantly, that I've now got the confidence to head for. Previously, I didn't have that confidence, and that's, when it talks about Transformation Day, and we talked about it, there's a big build-up, wasn't there, to the Transformation Day, and I was listening, thinking, when people were talking about it, people who've been through it before, thinking, it can't be life-changing.
It can't be that epiphany. It can't be.
Can't be, yeah, and I hope it'd be great if it was, but it isn't going to happen, and and actually it was, and yeah, and I'm so glad we did it, because the next chapter and the chapter beyond that, hopefully, is exciting and optimistic.
So that's a big statement, a big statement, Paul. That you're saying that you probably wouldn't have thought about making the significant changes you're considering now had you not had that experience.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. I'm sure that's the case, Jules, because and when I've been writing about this, or when I've been putting some stuff together in terms of good practice and so on, and reflecting on my developments, and I call it self-actualization or self-realization. That's what that day was. That's what's moved my thinking forward enormously. And what I mean by that is self-knowledge. It's understanding myself and understanding how I behave and how I react. I've done that in pockets along the way, and I've done other things because of the nature of the work I've done over the last 40 years. I have had to have elements of self-reflection and think about a way of reacting or a way of not reacting, and in some cases overthink things. But this was putting it all together in, this was me in total, which is very different to, this is how you need to behave in this situation, or if you're going to make this impact, you need to focus on this. This was much more the holistic thing. This is Paul. This is what it feels like. This is what it looks like, and this is what you're capable of doing.
And that's huge, isn't it? That's absolutely huge, to think that by finding Paul, finding out what you actually do want to do and what you're capable of doing, and that confidence thing came about in a single day.
Yeah, it's not exactly a catchy film title, is it? Finding Paul, but it's got resonance somewhere. But without overstating it, and it is a big grand statement, and from time to time I do make big grand statements, but it's genuinely felt. I think you can tell that from from my demeanour, and I'm emotional talking about it.
And I think that really is the sort of catalyst, I think, for change, is when we finally decide that we've had enough of carrying around the odd bits and pieces, and we actually do want to take out the thread and start sewing it all together, and deciding what we want to take forward with us. And I think that was the other thing you said about forgiveness. Would you think it felt quite permissive? Was it quite a permissive day? Do you think it was about you giving yourself permission to start looking at what you wanted to?
Yes, and I suppose underpinning all of that, and I probably put it quite clumsily to start with, but there comes a point when you're ready to share and give yourself permission to do things. And again, reflecting, I wonder whether the time was obviously right for me then. 20 years ago, it might have been a very different experience. But if I had been ready for it 20 years ago, then I'm sure it would have had the same impact. And the permissive bit is about, as you say, giving yourself permission, and that's got to be based on some experience, I suppose. It's got to be based on, most importantly, recognizing in yourself that there is a need to address things, or have a look at things, or reflect a little bit more deeply, or in this case, very deeply.
I think, yeah, I agree with you. And I think, people would naturally question that you could actually unpack and address that much in a single day, um, because does sound a little bit unwieldy, doesn't it, to actually be able to do that. And I think there would be a natural reticence from people listening to think, well, I don't know that, that seems quite far-fetched. But seeing the process and seeing the way that we move through the day together, and the questioning, that I was able to sort of use on you, no doubt you did have that huge shift. And it was an epiphany. It was a privilege to share it. It was an epiphany. And I think my mission, if you will, is to not educate people about what it is, but to actually reassure them that it's a really, really positive, cathartic experience to enjoy.
Yes, and you continue to enjoy it afterwards. And probably immediately afterwards, I described the journey home and how tired I was, but in a positive way. It's like, I suppose I'd worked, and you'd certainly worked, but I'd worked very, very hard. But the fruits of that hard work were already beginning to emerge, and they've continued to emerge since. So, but I don't regret a single moment or anything that was said, or anything said or reflected upon. It was all very, very positive. And talking to other people, I haven't heard anybody else who feels anything other than a hugely positive experience. And I can't overestimate that feeling about it being a safe. And I said earlier about free fall. Yes, you can take things out and have a look at them, and you can dig a bit further and prod a bit further, but there's a safety net. And at any stage, you can stop the process should you wish to. At no stage did I even consider doing it. I was excited by what was going to come out next, because I didn't know what was going to come out. I genuinely didn't. And I suppose that's the bit. The phrase awesome is massively overused. But it was an awesome experience, because I didn't know what was going to happen next, not really. And I certainly didn't know how we were going to conclude it, but it was a natural conclusion. I felt it was a very natural conclusion. Walk as one person, or as a person, an incomplete person, and walked out as a slightly more complete person, I suppose.
And all that stuff was there all along, wasn't it? All that stuff has been. It's just such a fascinating topic to sort of talk around, because all of that stuff was buried somewhere,
Yeah,
brought out, as you said, from time to time with triggers,
yeah,
caused problems in varying degrees, but to actually make sense of it. And I think that for me is a really big thing, the making sense of everything, making sense of who you are. And you said, going into the experience as an incomplete Paul and coming out of it as a complete Paul. It is kind of making sense of your timeline, isn't it? It's making sense of it all.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I went in as an incomplete. I came out as more complete. I think the important thing is that it taught me how to look at things, how to consider things. So such was the depth that we explored, that stuff is still coming out now. So the process has got a long way to go, I've no doubt, but there is an element of further completion as you move along. That's the powerful, long-lasting bit of the experience.
And when you're describing the experience to other people, do you find yourself getting excited with the sort of the whole description of what happens and how they're likely to feel?
I suppose I haven't talked to lots of people about it, but anybody I have talked to about it has started yawning after about 20 minutes, because I've started to go and then I go and go and go. In a pleasant way, in a slightly, um, you are going on about this quite a bit. We've got the message. It was a powerful experience. Can we talk about something else now? But then when I was talking to the guy yesterday, I've known for 30 years, and he was saying, based on what I've already experienced, but more importantly, I went to the course in the first place because I'd listened to you talking about it, and I'm going on to the next bit because I'm now really, really interested to find out what this breakthrough day is. And interestingly, one of the bonds between myself and this guy is that we have had some similar experiences, which were life changing experiences, and he, like me, is um, uh, has put those things away and rarely talks about them. And we've probably, because we've had similar experiences, we've been able around a particular issue. We have talked about it, and he's probably not talked to very many people about that. And likewise, neither have I. But the fact that I was able to say, because he asked me yesterday, he said, "Did you talk about that stuff?" I said, "Oh yeah, it was significant. I needed to." "Were you emotional?" "God, yeah, I was emotional, but I needed to be, because if I hadn't have been, then I was talking about the wrong stuff. If it didn't make me cry, if it didn't make me, feel very, very, take me back to a time when I was deeply hurt, then it wasn't worth looking at, or not worth looking at, but it wasn't the significance that I'd attached to it, which is probably why I'd never taken it out, or very rarely took it out to have a look at it."
And I think that's why you need somebody who's pretty skilled in actually eliciting this stuff, because we go into any interaction, I believe, with stuff we're prepared to share and stuff we're not.
Yeah,
And when you come out of the other end and you've actually sort of addressed all of this stuff, and you're feeling so much better about yourself, um, it clearly needed to be talked around, didn't it? It clearly needed to be addressed. And I think, as you say, the benefits of explaining that to other people are huge, um, to how much benefit they would get about digging stuff up and, sort of looking at it and then packing it away. I just wanted to just very quickly touch on the sort of disassociative nature of the experience, because you've spoken really well about being emotional and you cried. And am I is it fair to say that despite that there's a slight feeling of being disassociated, as if you were looking at somebody else doing this?
Definitely.
um,
Yeah. Yes. I just, well, a couple of triggers there when you just explaining that, talking about that. I would say that what it did was it untangled some really, really tight psychological knots. It freed those, and it also assuaged some very, very deep places which I didn't think would ever be assuaged, be soothed. They still hurt. We all have had experience that hurt for different reasons, but it actually felt better. It felt much better for having brought it out and looked at it. But it is a dispassionate experience, yeah. It is. You're in the room, you're talking to somebody, but the words are coming out, and you're almost looking at yourself as you are talking. Yes. Disassociative is not dispassionate. Disassociative is exactly what it is.
I
But
think that does. I think that does lead to dispassion, and I think that's probably a natural state of self care, of self awareness, of, being able to talk about it during the day, in a disassociative manner. I feel enables you to really, really look at stuff, without getting too tied up in, this is going to really hurt, so I'm going to pack this away again. And I found that to be of huge benefit, that you can actually talk. I could talk to you, and I could ask you questions, and your responses were all not third party, but psychologically third party, if that makes sense. You were talking about you almost as if you were another person. And that, I felt, really added to the permissive state that you were in. That it's okay to talk about this now, because this was Paul of another time. And, and this is what happened, and it's okay, it's fine. But I think by keeping you in that disassociative state, I think that does lead to much greater objectivity, a much greater ability to actually explore and unpack and repack, and make sense of it all.
You're absolutely right, and I suppose I hadn't really thought about it in that way, but I suppose, who else would I have talked to about those experiences without getting some kind of reaction, without getting possibly some kind of judgment? Why have I been very private about myself and my experiences, my relationships and events in my life? Because I had a fear of bringing those things out because of, and I suppose, being judged, or that it might change the relationship that I have with somebody by sharing some of that stuff. So being able to do it in that safe environment with somebody who you trust, and who, as you said earlier, has a skill base that allows them to draw that stuff out. And most of the time, Jules, you were listening. You were putting in an occasional question at just the right time, which would move it on, or explore it deeper, or move it on to something else. And that helped enormously. But you don't meet people every day that can do that for you. You meet people that you love, you meet people you respect, you meet people that you get on well with, but you're not going to sit down with them for a day and go through your innermost thoughts and experiences, your most personal and intimate experiences, because it would almost inevitably change the relationship you have with that person. And possibly, to some people, it would, this is a very cynical view, but would give them some kind of power. How do you know it wouldn't come back and be used in the heat of an argument or whatever? So all sorts of things contribute to that, and all sorts of considerations. That's why it's a privilege to be able to sit there and do it in that way.
So for anybody that was, still unsure of, the sort of process, the experience, listening to you today is very humbling, giving a really, really good key account of how you went through the day. And even now, that this time later, still feeling the positives, it's reassuring. It's reassuring to hear you say that. It's been absolutely brilliant talking with you. It really has.
As usual, a pleasure. I hope at some stage that somebody finds it helpful and interesting. Yeah, thank you.
It's a mission, isn't it, Paul? It's a mission to share the benefits. It's a mission to share the benefits of being able to do this, being able to, really unpack what's going on and make sense of it all and go on. And for me, I think peace and calm come very, very high up in the benefits. Just peace and calm, and that I'm okay, everything's okay. And that's when you're feeling, stressed, or when you're feeling a little bit, self-critical. Peace and calm and feeling that you're okay is, it's a nice place to be, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate you talking with me today.